Hello and welcome everyone to the final day of the 2021 Notre Dame Student Peace Conference. We are so happy to have all of you here again, and I hope that you have enjoyed listening to all of our fantastic presenters. I am very, very excited to introduce you to our keynote speaker today, Bridget Moix. Bridget is the U.S. Executive Director of Peace Direct. Peace Direct is an international charity dedicated to stopping wars one person at a time. Here, she is responsible for sharing their work with the U.S. peacebuilding community, funders, and policymakers. She has worked for 20 years on international peace and conflict issues with a focus on U.S. foreign policy. If you would like to read more about her background, please visit her bio in Socio. We are so fortunate to have Bridget here with us today to speak on the role of local communities in a new era of global peacebuilding. We believe that her experience in peacebuilding, particularly at a time when American democracy appears to be in a fragile state, will enrich this conference greatly and all help us understand how we, as peacebuilders, can continue building inclusive processes for peace. I'm now going to pass it off to Bridget.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thanks so much for the invitation to be here and to be able to follow on some of the other speakers that you had, some of the presentations. I wish I could have been with you for the whole thing. I'm sure it's been fantastic. So it's wonderful to be kind of closing out your time with the Peace Conference, and congratulations on pulling this together in this new virtual world that we live in. And I look forward to catching up with some of the other presentations afterwards. So I'm Bridget. I work with Peace Direct, as you heard, and I'm really pleased to talk to you today about shifting power for peace building, and particularly about the role of local communities in building peace. This is a topic that's very dear to my heart and central to the mission of Peace Direct. Peace Direct was founded on the principle that local people know their problems best and have the solutions that their communities need. So I'll be talking a little bit about what we do, how we do it, and then really the approach to thinking about how do we engage in peace building in a new way in the global era that we live in, where inclusive approaches are so important, and moving beyond the surface, as your conference is focused on, is what we're called to do. So I'm going to share my screen and go through the presentation, and then I really look forward to the Q&A and discussion with you all, and hearing from you. So let me share my screen. And go to this. All right, can you see it now? Is that clear, Grace? All right. So shifting power for peace. First of all, I just wanted to sort of recap what you already know about your own conference around these questions that you've been asking over the last few days, because I think it's really important to think about the framing that you have offered as young peace builders, as the next generation, thinking about how we guide this field forward. And what are the ways that we use our own individual experiences, that we channel current social unrest to allow communities across the world to adopt new principles of strategic peace building, and to really move the needle, as you've said. So really thinking about your conference framing, I want to talk a little bit about Peace Direct and what we do, so you have some of the context of the organization that I work with, the perspective that we bring. So Peace Direct was founded in about 2004 in London, and we are dedicated to working with local people to stop violent conflict and build lasting peace. And as you can see here, we work with partners in a number of countries around the world. Africa, Asia also have begun really thinking about what our role is here in the US and how we work with local peace builders in the US as well, and hope to work more in other parts of the Americas as well. And Peace Direct was founded after an initial research project where the man, Dylan Matthews, who is now the CEO in London, was a graduate student, actually. And he was asked by our founder, Scilla Elworthy, to start looking at who are the communities around the world who are building peace in the midst of war zones, in the midst of conflict areas. What do they do? How do we learn more about them? You know, where do they exist? And began doing this research before the internet. So you can imagine he's collecting brochures from organizations by mail a lot of times from around the world, and had stacks of them on his apartment floor because there were so many groups. An initial search of just his initial research found 300 groups around the world. We've now mapped over 1,800 local groups. And so really we began asking, well, what are these groups doing, and how is it that the international community that talks about peace building and is trying to work on resolving conflicts and building peace isn't more aware of them? So we began as Peace Direct to take a local approach to peace and peace building. And so I just want to show you a short video, which is just about 1 minute, which will give you a better perspective of a sort of brief look at what we do and how we do it. So that's just a little brief commercial in a way about Peace Direct, but that we use to help people understand what does peace building look like, which is a question that we often get, and how do we approach it. So our values as an organization really lie fundamentally on a number of beliefs. We believe peace is possible. There are a lot of people in the world who actually don't believe that. But we really do believe that peace is possible and that it is being built and created and unsurfaced all the time. We believe that local people understand their problems and are best placed to lead their solutions. And that's actually different than some approaches in the peace building world where a lot of the knowledge is considered to be outside a conflict, or the intervention of outsiders is thought to be needed to build peace. And we believe that the processes to stop atrocities or build peace really do require rapid response and long-term peace building. So if you've learned about conflict cycles, and there's different theories about that, we really believe that peace building is something that needs to happen throughout all processes, all times in the conflict cycles. And we think that everyone, all of us, have a role to play as peace builders, that it's not a field that should be something that you have to get a degree in. It's great when people do, when you dig into an area of knowledge deeply. But just like, say, health and community health, well, there are doctors and specialists that help us stay healthy. But we all have a responsibility to brush our teeth and eat well and learn all the ways that we can contribute to our own health. And it's the same with the health of communities. We really believe everyone has a role to play. How do we approach peace building? Well, your earlier speaker, and who many of you know, I'm sure, John Paul Lederach, we think has the best definition that we found. And so we really frame our work based on his definition as a comprehensive concept, generates and sustains the full array of processes. If you saw in that video at the end, it was flipping through some of the different partners and the different types of peace building work that they do. And it looks different in different places because the realities that communities are living are different and the solutions that they need are different. So it is a very diverse and broad type of process with a wide range of activities. But we really fundamentally believe that both seeks to end violent conflict and address the root causes of violence and create long-term positive societal change. So really that is a difference between, say, a conflict resolution approach, which may be trying to resolve a conflict at a particular moment, and hopefully is addressing the root causes of violence. But we think really the fundamental work of addressing those root causes is key to peace building. And that comes in later when we think about the connection, say, between justice and peace. So locally led peace building is, as I said, what Peace Direct and what we really believe is needed in the global era now. And what is that? We understand it as being imagined, created, led, sustained by those who are directly impacted. So local for us is not necessarily geographic as much as it is the communities who are living the experience of violent conflict and those who are actively working to transform it nonviolently. Those are local peace builders as we understand it. And they're adapting and changing to their local realities. They're recognized and engaged by their local communities. The approach of locally led peace building is intersectional and integrated. And this is different than, say, how the international aid system often approaches peace building and how to support peace processes. So we can talk more about that if you want. And we think that locally led, of course, is one part of a broader system of change that has to happen. So locally led doesn't mean you just leave all the work to local communities and that there are no responsibilities or engagement by the broader regional, national, international actors, but that it's actually embedded within that broader system at the center and in the lead. And that outsiders do have a role sometimes to play in supporting it. So why do we think that locally led peace building is sort of the missing key or the under-supported key that can help unlock a more peaceful world in the future? Well, we know that the current approaches aren't working. Global violence is at a 30-year high. There's increasing authoritarianism in the world. Human rights indicators are all going down. And so what's working right now, what we're doing right now isn't working. And conflict now is highly localized. Wars don't happen, as we know, on big battlefields in the same way. And so local communities are the ones who are really on the front lines. And there's growing evidence that locally led approaches, those approaches that are led by communities, are more effective, less costly, and more sustainable. This is some research that we've done. You can check it out at the link there that you see, Local Peace Building, What Works and Why. We looked across dozens of, I think about 75 or so evaluations of different types of peace building programs that were local peace building programs to assess their effectiveness. So it goes into some of the reasons why, different kinds of approaches that local communities use and why they seem to be effective. So that may be a useful resource for you. Letting locals lead. I won't show this video, but if you go to Peace Direct's YouTube channel, you can watch another video which goes into much more depth about the problems with the current outsider intervention approach and why that doesn't work. Why is it that very well-intentioned people from the outside, like myself, who want to help build a more peaceful world, but are not living the realities of a particular conflict? Why is it that relying on that outside experience has become such an ingrained part of the international aid system and the international peace-building system? And how do we flip that around? So just another resource you can check out later. So I want to really talk about some of the amazing people that I have the honor and the privilege to work with and who are local peace builders for us. As I said, we've been trying to map local peace building groups around the world for about 15 years now and have mapped over 1,800 local peace building groups in different countries. You can find those groups and what they do and some information about them, as well as blogs from different local peace builders at peaceinsight.org. And we run that website to really show the world that it doesn't matter what kind of context you're in, what level of conflict, how horrible the headlines in the news that we see are, there are always people building peace. There are always local communities and local leaders who are working to overcome violence and injustice and oppression. And so we want to bust the myth that there's no capacity in a place. That's often a phrase that we hear around the policy context in which I work. And we don't believe that's ever true, really. So local actors are those who are experiencing the day-to-day realities. And these are some of our partners. Flory is in DRC. Dishani is in Sri Lanka. And I'll talk more about some of these other folks. They're amazing people. So why are local peace builders effective and key? Well, they have a deep knowledge of the conflict in the community. Outsiders don't. I work in Washington, D.C. And so I go to a lot of meetings where I sit around tables with people who look like me, are from the U.S., are white, and say, oh, well, I'm an expert on such and such country. And maybe they've spent a couple years studying that country, and they're learning, and they're certainly know some things. But the expertise, we believe, really lies with local communities. And it's very hard for me to sit in Washington and hear outsiders and see the way the system actually drives people, say, you're going to become an expert on this country in a couple years, and then we're going to move you on to another country. So we have to look to the local peace builders for that deep knowledge of the community and the culture and the local realities. Local peace builders also maintain relationships and networks which are fundamental for building peace, for dealing with conflict and building peace. Outsiders can build relationships. They can help nurture and be part of networks. But a lot of times outsiders will leave and move on because they have to, or because they need to. And so those relationships that are maintained are key to peace. And they build the trust that's needed. And they're recognized leaders in their communities. So one of the other things that I mentioned that we really believe is that that peace really relies on local people and also ordinary people. So a lot of times we put peace builders up on a pedestal. We think of big names like Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama. But this quote, which I love, really says that if we were going to have a boot camp, a place where we could spend hours learning how to dissolve war, it would actually be run by ordinary people. A lot of people we've never seen or heard of. Ordinary men and women from all over the world who devote their lives to helping others be free of pain. Though that, to me, is who local peace builders are. The other thing that I think local peace builders do that is probably the most important ingredient for peace is that they provide hope. And one of the things that I've learned and been so humbled by in working with local peace builders around the world, learning from them, in my own PhD research, I really tried to listen and learn from local peace builders about why they do what they do and what kind of people are they, what motivates them. And what was remarkable was that here are these people living in realities which I can only begin to imagine, cannot really ever imagine or understand fully the depths of what is the difficulties that they face. And yet they're incredibly hopeful. They bring a sense of hope for their communities, for the rest of us who want to help. That is really key, because if you don't have hope, if you can't believe that another reality is possible, that things can change, then you can't build peace. And so this fundamental ingredient of hope is, I think, one of the most important things that local peace builders provide. So I just want to tell you a story about a dear colleague and friend and teacher of mine, a local peace builder named Dishani Jayawira. And one of the things that Dishani has taught me is that building peace requires all elements of our spirit and our being. It requires our head, that we have to think and understand and analyze. We do need that capacity to really understand what is the problem. How are we going to think about what's needed through our heads? But it also requires our heart. And it really requires us to be present with people who are living in conflict. And Dishani, what she does in Sri Lanka is that she spent many years working with communities, divided communities around the country in the midst of the war, very quietly, bringing people together just for dialogue, just to hear one another, just to connect at the heart, not trying to solve problems, but just to know one another. And that building of peace really does require both the head and the heart, the analysis and the human connection. That's something we're not taught that much about in, say, our peace building classes, but it's really key. And Dishani also taught me that it's not enough to think about the problem and feel the connection to another person, but we have to put our hands to work. We have to actually do the work together to build peace. And that requires effort, it requires dedication, it can require sacrifice. So head, heart, and hands is Dishani, one of Dishani's teachings for me about what peace requires. She's since added to this also, it's not a fourth H, although it would be nice if it was, but the concept of the whole environment, the whole ecosystem in which we live, that a healthy ecosystem is necessary for peace. So this is a theory. This is a peace building theory that a local peace builder, Dishani, developed through the practice that she undertook in working with divided communities in Sri Lanka to bring them together. I want to tell one other story about a local peace builder that I deeply admire. Issei Abdullahi was the executive director of an organization called the Somali Agricultural Life Development Organization. And what Issei did and what the organization does is train young people in agricultural skills, job skills, how to start a business, and peace building skills. And they do this in Somalia because, of course, young people don't have a lot of options, economic options. What they need is an economic livelihood, because if not, the only other options available often are being recruited into an armed group or potentially trying to, having to leave their community. And so Issei believes deeply that the links between basic human needs like livelihoods and jobs and alternatives and hope for young people are key to linking those to peace building. And Sado and Issei did this work, have done this work, continue to do this work for many years. And Issei came to visit the US once, and I was so happy to be able to take him to Washington and to meet with policymakers. And he was always the first to say, to members of Congress or to people in the State Department, he said, for the price of one of your drone strikes in my country, I could train 1,000 young people in building peace and economic opportunities. And so Issei he spoke truth to power, and he really knew how to navigate the conflicts within his own country, as well as the power structures that were preventing the success of the peace building work that he was doing, the militarized approaches that get in the way of local peace building, and which are so prevalent, unfortunately, by our own government. Issei was unfortunately killed about a year and a half ago, going on 2 years ago now, in an attack on a hotel in Mogadishu, where he was at the time. And it was a real reminder to me. It really broke our organization in a way. It was very, very difficult for us because he was such a dear colleague and leader. But it reminded me what courage peace building takes, because Issei was the kind of person that would say to me, he said to me when he was here, he said, you say that Al-Shabaab is on the terrorist list and no one can do anything with Al-Shabaab. You can't talk to them, you can't engage them in peace building approaches because of the laws that the US has. He says, who is Al-Shabaab? Who are they? Many of them are people who move in and out of Al-Shabaab because they need to find a way to navigate the community. He says, I have to talk to Al-Shabaab all the time if I want to go do a workshop for young people in a different part of the country. I have to travel. I have to be able to speak to them and navigate my way through those relationships. So Issei believed that even with groups like Al-Shabaab, which we would in the US often think, well, you can't negotiate with them. He believed you could. He believed that peace required dialogue, and you had to find a way to open up those processes. He had a vision for Al-Shabaab and the government of Somalia being able to finally resolve the conflict there through dialogue. And he left that vision to others, planted some seeds that I hope will carry forward. So local peace builders around the world, those are some of the folks that I have learned so much from, that I admire, that I'm honored to have worked with. But really also here in the US, we have, I think over the past few years, and certainly over this past year, we have really begun to take a look at ourselves. The peace building, the international, so-called international peace building field and community, which is often based in the global north, organizations like my own, Peace Direct, that's based in the UK and the US. What is our responsibility here in our own countries, which, don't get listed on ACLED's, largest conflicts going on in the world, but where there are deep, deep legacies and ongoing systems of racism, of violence, both direct violence happening, gun violence and other forms of violence in our country, and also indirect violence and systemic violence, structural violence that keeps our society divided and keeps communities of color still oppressed and targeted. And so really looking at what is the role of local peace builders in the US. We began mapping local peace building in the US. You can find the US information, which continues to evolve. We're just still beginning it, even though we found almost 200 groups that we've mapped and many others that we're still waiting to hear back from. You can find that at peaceinsight.org and learn more about groups around your own community. There are some other organizations I just want to call out because I think they're doing remarkable work, and there are ways that we can connect here in the US. One is the Trust Network, and you can find information about them in Mediators Beyond Border, which hosts the Trust Network. The Trust Network was formed in the lead up to these past elections, and really to create an early warning, early response system around the US, given the outbursts of violence that we continue to see and the level of violence around elections that has been growing in our own country. So you can check it out, and actually you can volunteer and get involved with them. The U.S. Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Movement is another a really impressive group. It's still forming. It's Black-led movement, which looks at both how to support the efforts that are in Congress right now around a national process for truth and healing, as well as locally led racial healing circles and racial healing processes that are happening around the US now. So I really encourage you to check out them and see if you want to get involved with the US Truth, Racial Healing, Transformation Movement. You can sign up on their website, I'm pretty sure. And I think that this work of developing a national US process, a process for facing our own truth as a country around conflict and violence, and also then moving into how do we transform and heal as a country. And then finally, there's a new initiative, a new community online that you can find through the Plus Peace movement. It's called The Hive. And it's for local peace builders. It's sort of a social media space to connect, to learn, to grow, to co-create around local peace building. And so I really encourage you to check that out as well, if that's something that you're interested in. So just going in a little bit more into some of the research that I was doing that continues to inspire me about what motivates local peace builders. So when I was interviewing local peace builders, and I did a big survey, and I tried to do this research a few years ago, one of the things that I was looking at is what really were the motivating factors for people living in conflict areas that were really striving to build peace. And a number of common themes came up. So, and they all relate to other people. What I found was that local peace builders, as they describe their motivations, really describe them in relation to other people. They describe them in relation to their family, to their children. They describe their relationship to God or spirit or their own spiritual relationships. And they describe them in terms of transformative experiences or individual characteristics that often they sort of credited to other people, encouraging in them. And then this sense of hope that really was about this relational hope, the hope of being able to live together in a different way. So those were some of the motivations that local peace builders described themselves. The other question that I asked and that Peace Direct is always asking is, how then can we better support local peace builders? And this is what they have said. This is what they have asked for. They really want to be recognized and to understand that our futures are tied up together and that we have a responsibility, what I call relational responsibility to one another. That's my word, relational responsibility. But they really want to be recognized and understand that the work they're doing is connected to all of our safety. And they want their leadership to be trusted and supported. We really believe, and they want a shift of power and attention and resources away from the internationally driven system to support locally led processes. It doesn't mean the international system doesn't have a role, but they want genuine partnerships, and they want those to be long-term, and they want flexible funding, long-term processes that provide resources over the long term and shift the control of those resources and the sustainability of those resources to local communities. And they want to focus more attention on relationships, family, children, youth leadership. It's actually not easy to integrate families into externally created peacebuilding programs a lot of times. A lot of times there are workshops that individuals can go to, but the realities that communities are living often is their whole family is living in a conflict, and they need processes that engage their whole family. And more support for women and girls is still needed. Women and girls still are key, fundamental to peace. They make peace processes more successful. That's been shown. And yet they're often still marginalized and not supported. Their leadership is not supported as much. And then we really need to shift how we fund and support peace building so that it is not some siloed sector, but that we're able to really support integrated approaches because local communities don't divide up what they do between now I'm going to do development, and then maybe we'll have another project on environment, and then we'll have a project on human rights. Those silos have been created by the international system. They've been created by outsiders and outside funding streams. Local communities have much more integrated approaches. They're constantly integrating, that responding to the needs of their communities based on the need, not based on the silos of funding that then they have to find, go after. And then we really need to support the practice of passing on hope and really thinking about how is hope a key ingredient of peace that can be practically supported. How do we do that? So in the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've begun at Peace Direct to think more deeply about this question of shifting the power. And we really think that part of what we need to do is decolonize peace building itself. Decolonizing the aid system is something a lot of people are talking about now. And peace building has become wrapped up in the aid system. It's not where it began, but it's become wrapped up in that. And so we really need to think about decolonizing peace building. What does this mean? Well, it really is about deconstructing colonial ideologies regarding the assumed superiority and privilege of Western thought and approaches. And this really is wrapped up in the whole approach that a lot of externally driven peace building programs now have behind them. And then there's an issue of the white gaze. This came up, we did a consultation. So Peace Direct often will do global consultations online. We bring local peace builders, practitioners, academics, others from around the world together online for a few days to talk about issues. And we just did one on decolonizing peacebuilding, which is where this some of these findings came from. And this idea of the white gaze is really, I think, really important. And thinking about how the lens of our own white ethnocentrism that assumes we're referring to whiteness as the starting point, again and again crops up. So how do we think about this? How do we understand sort of these approaches within the aid and the peacebuilding system? Well, what's happening right now is that aid is flowing from the north to the south. So we're reinforcing economic dependencies. The aid keeps going. The assumption is the global south will always need the aid. The global north will always give the aid. And there's caught up in this cycle where neither side can get out of it. And civil society in the global south is increasingly creating mini me's, we call them sometimes. So to be able to access that funding, to be able to engage and get the support of the international system, they're creating NGOs that are modeled on the global north NGOs, which is not necessarily serving their communities. And decision-making is still held in the global north at headquarters, HQs, with power balances disproportionately affecting the local practitioners, particularly those with intersectional identities, who don't fit well into the categories that they have to access in the global north system. And of course, COVID-19 has added new layers onto all of this within our approaches to trying to work within this system. So the inequalities have been deepened, they've been revealed, and we have a lot of work to do to try to overcome those. So after this consultation, some of the findings, instead of findings, we were trying to get out of just having findings. We really wanted to offer reflection questions for any practitioner in the aid system, but this applies to those of us in the peacebuilding world, certainly folks like me who work at in a global north organization, to really reflect on our own positionality. How have we benefited from the systems in which we all live, which are systems that privilege white. They're discriminatory systems still within which we live, even if we're trying to fight against them, but we've still benefited from that. How do we inadvertently reinforce those systems? How do we remain humble? So within all of this, it's really important to think about, how do I offer what my gifts? How do I give something to building peace, and also remain humble and understand that we are constantly needing to learn from one another and to develop new forms of knowledge, new ways of thinking. And then how do we really, what can we do? How are we situated best to help shift access and power so that peace building can be led by communities who are most impacted? And maybe that sometimes means getting out of the way. I say this a lot. Sometimes my role should just be to get out of the way, to let the local peace builders lead. One of the things I love best about our work is that I get to bring local peace builders into places of power in Washington, D.C. or at the UN in New York, and then step back and just be there trying to support them. Because my voice doesn't need to be the voice. It doesn't need to always be the voice that's heard. So I just want to wrap up, and then I'd love to move to some Q&A to really emphasize that you are all already peace builders. You're at this conference. Many of you are studying peace building. Now you want to have a career in it, a life in it. You feel called to it. So you are also peace builders. We all are. And the role that you play will be critical for shaping this field in the future. So everything I've said is some of what I've been learning, but you all will be leading this field. And so you all will be the ones who are taking it to the next, beyond the surface, to the next phase. So I would love for you to think about what motivates you to choose peace. What has inspired you? How do you stay connected to that source of hope and inspiration? staying connected to these is really our own sources of hope and motivation is really important. So I just want to leave you with this thought about remembering and reconnecting to those sources of your own inspiration. So finally, what can you do? Learn more about locally led peace building. Certainly, please, if Peace Direct has resources to offer, we'd love for you to join our email list. Get involved in your own community. I'm sure many of you are, but there's so many organizations across the US and across the world that need support, that are doing amazing work for peace. And so find the one that fits you well and get involved. And if you want to be part of our own student ambassador program, we do have a student ambassador program, Peacebuilder Allies, we call it. And you can email my colleague Christine at students@peacedirect.org, and we'd love for you to get involved more. So it's been wonderful talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation now. So let me stop the screen share. Thank you. Grace, can I turn it over to you for the...
Yes, you can. Thank you so much, Bridget. That was really, really incredible and very much, I think, needed. So everyone, please share your questions for Bridget in the chat. I will put them on the screen and then Bridget can answer those. So I'm going to start with one. So on the concept of head, heart, hands, whole environment, could you give an everyday example or use of each?
That's a great question. Well, maybe I'll just describe a little bit about Deshani's work. So she was bringing the communities together, and they would use their head together to do an analysis of what is the problem that their community was facing. So sitting down and just doing, maybe you've learned about a conflict analysis, right? So thinking about, well, we have this problem in our community. What is the problem? How do we define it together? And then maybe doing an exercise about just getting to know one another, right? So really learning to connect with one another as people. And we've all done sort of get to know you exercises in different ways. And then putting to work together. Maybe it's creating a community garden. Maybe there's food insecurity in the community. That's maybe part of what they've defined in their analysis. And they've connected with one another, and they have those relationships, and they say, well, let's build a community garden that we can all do. So putting that analysis and those relationships then to practical work. And of course, the community garden then would potentially be also serving the environment and helping address that broader environment as well. So that's one attempt. That was a tough question.
Awesome. Thank you. I will let other people comment in the chat if they have questions. I have a question. So you have so much background and so much experience in this space, and I was just sort of wondering if you could go into some sort of specific examples of things that you've done in the past that have sort of helped helped you learn all of these things and got you to where you are today, and maybe give a little bit of advice for college students like me who are sort of wanting to get involved in the peace building field but not really sure where to go.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So I feel like I've been really, really lucky through my life that I have found amazing mentors and opportunities. Often, sometimes ones that I looked for. And so really thinking about what is the work that you want to do? What really speaks to you? Is it environmental issues that relate to peace building? Is it human rights and relation to peace? Do you love to mediate? Do you love dialogue? Are you called, where is it that you're feeling called? And then seeking out, well, who's doing that work, right? Who are the organizations that are doing that kind of work? And how can I connect to them? How can I offer myself in some way? Recognizing that a lot of times, say if you get an internship, I've done internships with different organizations at different times in my development, my career. And, a lot of times you get more than you give in those internships. And we have interns in our organization, and we love having interns, and we get a lot from them, but it's also an important part of learning. And so really entering those spaces, trying to say, what can I learn? What can I give? I'm going to give everything I can give, but what can I learn through practical experience? I really advise people to also move in and out of, say, academic and practical. So if you are studying peace in undergraduate, conflict studies in undergraduate, find a way to get some experience with a local organization that does some kind of work in your own community. And then, if you would want to go do the studying, just always kind of combine those things, because the practice is so important. And I really enjoyed going often I'll go and I'll study for a while, and then I'll come back and I'll work for a while. And then some years later, I'll be like, okay, I need to think more. I need to take the time to think. And if I'm able to find a different way to study and learn, that's really helpful to me as well. So I don't know if that helped a little bit, Grace.
It definitely did. Thank you. We have many questions filing in, so I will begin with this one. So when talking about the wider ecosystem and environment, how much of an impact has climate change had on Peace Direct's work in recent years?
That's a great question, Rona. And it definitely has impacted many of our partners in different parts of the world. And we have partners whose entire communities are disrupted because of the change in rain cycles and the just climate change issues. And so part of what happens is it can exacerbate conflict. So it can lead to communities that need to move their like pastoral communities that need to move their herds into new areas, and it can lead to new conflicts between communities as resources become more scarce or just more disrupted. But it can also lead to opportunities. So there are opportunities and some efforts around, say, water sharing in the Middle East, where they've become peace-building efforts because these communities are finding solutions to a new problem that they have together. So I think that, peace building absolutely has to take on climate change in a much bigger way than we have so far. There are some, I think at a local level, it happens because communities are dealing with those issues. But at the kind of international level, or thinking about even how we integrate our studies, I think we really need to bring in climate and climate change much more. And I would say that your generation knows that way better than my generation, and you will be leading that.
Awesome. Thanks, Bridget. So now from Peter, how is restorative justice and reconciliation implemented in crisis areas?
That's a great question, Peter. So we have a number of partners who work in restorative justice and reconciliation, and it looks different for every community, I would say. So I can just speak to maybe give an example, if that's helpful, of one of our partners. We work with an organization called FOCI in South Kivu in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's an area where there's a lot of conflict around land, and there's ongoing violence, atrocities, mass killings that happen. And there's very little access to any formal justice systems. And so what these communities have done, because they actually are not as interested in putting people in jail as they are in stopping the violence and of restoring relationships in their communities. They're interested in a restorative approach. So they use a traditional process called the baraza, which in that area is sort of a community meeting. It's a community decision-making process called the baraza. And within the barazas, they've created peace courts. And so these peace courts will take a restorative approach when they bring maybe there's a community having conflict. I was able to actually go and see one of them, and so I wish I could had pictures to show you, because you're in an area which has very little infrastructure or functioning governance of any kind, but the community all comes together for a session of the Peace Court because there's been a conflict. And so the ex-combatants come, the young people come, the women come, different groups are coming, and they're kind of celebrating and affirming everyone's role in the community. And then the people who are having the conflict will talk about what happened, give their perspective, each give their perspective about what happened. And then there is a court in sense of kind of a group of elders. And there are women courts, specific women courts as well for particularly around issues of sexual violence. And so those would be much more just women a lot of times. But then the court will listen and they'll ask the communities. So they'll ask the different groups of the community kind of like, what do you all think and how should we deal with this? And then as a community, they'll usually find a way of reaffirming coming up with a solution, sort of like, okay, well, you need to help, you need to give the land back or whatever the solution is. And then they'll have a ceremony, the reconciliation ceremony, which when I was there was the two people who were in conflict sharing because what's available, even if you don't have clean water in Eastern DRC, a Coca-Cola, because this is the realities of what they live in. And so they would each take a drink of the Coca-Cola. And this was part of the reconciliation process of sort of reconnecting the community. So, communities, they're creative and they take what they know, they take their traditional knowledge, they take their current realities, and they work on trying to heal their communities. So that's one example. I'm sure there's lots more. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, we have 3 more. So is hope itself enough to build peace in local communities?
That's a good question, Josephine. I would say probably not. I would say hope is probably necessary, but not sufficient. Because, again, going back to maybe the Deshani's theory about it, it's not enough to I think it's necessary to have hope so that people can work for peace. But then it's also necessary to do the work for peace, if that makes sense. So I think it requires it, but it needs more.
Great. So after an outside entity has been involved in trying to build peace in a local community, is there some risk to trying to shift those efforts to more local community builders? In other words, is there a risk that some in the local community may feel abandoned in some way? Have you ever seen that, and how can one respond to that?
That's a great question. So we were part of we led a research project about transitions similar to this. It was called Stopping as Success. And if you go to stoppingassuccess.org, I'm pretty sure that's the website, you will find a lot of cases about transitions. And we tried to look at successful cases of transition because, yes, there absolutely are risks. And a lot of international organizations over the years, have tried to shift to sort of transition out and shift to the local community. And part of what we found in the research is that there can be successful efforts in those, but they really require, it's a long-term process, and they really are more successful when the local community has already had leadership role from the beginning and has been able to already be making decisions about how things are happening, or at the beginning of any relationship by an outside entity, the issue of transition is addressed from the beginning. So we're coming in here, we have funding for a 3-year project. We want to support your organization and work with you on that. And what's going to happen after 3 years? And that having those conversations up front helps reduce that risk. And that really thinking about those issues in the early part of any relationship or partnership is really important.
Awesome. So our last question that I have right now is, how can this head, hearts, and hands method be used to better allow for justice after peace building? How can it affect the balance between reparations for harms done in a conflict and rebuilding the community's structure?
That's a really great question. I think that one of the things, I'm trying to channel Deshani and think about what Deshani would say to this question, because she's much wiser than I. But I think part of what she would say is that if you really do focus on having that heart connection, and even the head connection, but the heart connection, it will necessarily involve addressing injustices. Because if we really open ourselves to understanding the lived realities of communities who are suffering from oppression and injustice, then whatever solutions come, whatever peace building approaches come, have to address that, or we haven't really done that work. And the balance between reparations for harms done and rebuilding the community structure, I mean, this is the challenge, right? In every peace building process. How do you have accountability, and have some form of repair, whatever form that might take, that then helps the community move forward? And I think that actually we tend to think of those things as somehow oppositional or in tension, justice or peace, right? And we're sort of like, well, how do you have accountability or peace? But actually, how do you have either of them fully without the other? So maybe we also need to start thinking about them as more like yin and yang or something, than as this tension. We've sort of been taught that justice and peace are always in tension. But we're kind of reinforce that. And I think one of the things I've learned from local communities is that there are many communities who don't see that tension. They really see it differently. They see that these things work together, that repairing harm and rebuilding the community work together. We have a partner in DRC who works to reintegrate former combatants with communities. And that process involves a lot of work with each side, but it involves, yeah, of course, that ex-combatant, if they've caused harm, they're going to do something. They're going to do a bunch of hours of community service. Yes, they're going to repair. But they're necessary. Reintegrating them is necessary to rebuild the community.
Awesome. That is all very helpful. And I think that your presentation is a really important lens through which we can sort of view all the other presentations that we've seen. Just really focusing on that, local peace builders are a very integral part of, changing these systems. And I think that you just described that so well. And we are so thankful that you have been able to be here with us today. So I will, this presentation is going to be recorded so that anyone can rewatch it. And the game passcode for attending this session is BM Keynote. And so we are going to now take a 30-minute break and get back onto our other sessions. But Bridget, really, I just want to thank you so much. And everyone was so excited that we got to have you as our keynote speaker.
Oh, thank you so much. I was so excited to be part of this, and I really look forward to catching up on some of the other sessions. And I'm happy if people want to learn more, connect more with me or with Peace Direct, please feel free to reach out. Feel free to share my email. We'd love to engage more with you.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll see everyone soon. Thank you, everyone, for coming.